And you're looking at a live shot right now at the Ellington Field in Houston, Texas. The Bush family and the body of George H.W. Bush will be on its way to St. Martin's Episcopal Church, where the president's body will lie in repose until the funeral tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. And again, I welcome you back, and along with Andrew Whitman, we remember the late president. There were numerous speakers today, the first of which was John Meacham. John Meacham began as a biographer of the president, then as the years went on, became a trusted friend and confidant. He was there and helped with the Bush Museum, president, and told a funny anecdote saying, George Bush said, there's a lot of stuff about me here. And he said, that's the whole point of a museum and a presidential library. And the same thing when it related to his autobiography, where he said, you know, why do we keep talking about me? He goes, well, it's your biography. So he talked about the modesty of the late president, but also why his life was so exemplary. Hear John Meacham earlier today.
As Dana Carvey said, the key to a Bush 41 impersonation is Mr. Rogers trying to be John Wayne. George Herbert Walker Bush was America's last great soldier statesman, a 20th century founding father. He governed with virtues that most closely resemble those of Washington and of Adams, of TR and of FDR, of Truman and of Eisenhower, of men who believed in causes larger than themselves. 6'2", handsome, dominant in person, President Bush spoke with those big, strong hands, making fists to underscore points. A master of what Franklin Roosevelt called the science of human relationships. He believed that to whom much was given, much is expected. And because life gave him so much, he gave back again and again and again.
In addition to John Meacham, there was different people from different stages of the president's life, including a close friend who, by his own acknowledgement, the late president helped out on more than a few occasions when his public approval rating, not the president's, but former Senator Alan Simpson, wasn't at its highest. A friend and a colleague of the Bushes for more than 50 years. Here, the Wyoming Senator Alan Simpson.
In George Bush's theme of life, during all the highs and lows, there was a simple credo. What would we do without family and friends? Now, my life in Washington was rather tumultuous. I went from the A social list to the Z and never came back to the A. In one dark period, I was feeling awful low, and all my wounds were self-inflicted, all of them. And George called me early one morning, always early in the morning, country music playing in the background, and he said, I see the media is shooting you pretty full of holes. Actually, he said it a bit more pungently than that. And he said, why don't we go up to Camp David? You and Ann come over and we'll have a weekend together. At that time, his popularity rating was 93%. Mine was 0.93. And so off we went. The media, of course, all gathered as we headed to Marine One. And George said, now wave to your pals over there in the media, Al. And they didn't wave back. And later we're having a sauna. And I said, George, I am not unmindful as to what you are doing. You are propping up your old wounded duck pal. While you're at the top of your game, you reach out to me while I'm tangled in rich controversy and taking my lumps. And he said, yep. There were staff members, Al, who told me not to do this. But Al, This is about friendship and loyalty.
You know, Andrew, I came across a quote that the president said because the late president, some had accused him of, you know, he didn't have the carriage of a Reagan and everything else. And even though by now, especially in the last week, everyone gets reacquainted with his biography and you'd call him anything but a wimp, he'd been labeled by some as that. But he gave his own definition of toughness. If I could bring it up on the screen for a second. This is in the words of the late president. He said, "I equate toughness with moral fiber, with character, with principle, with demonstrated leadership in tough jobs where you emerge not bullying somebody, but with the respect of the people you led. That's toughness, that's fiber, that's character. I have got it, and if I happen to be decent in the process, that should not be a liability." Just consider those words, everyone, from then and then now. And if you think that we do not have or have had a chasm in the last 26 years or so, I don't think we've been paying attention. But I think he lived by those words. And again, you don't have to agree with everything he did, but he never embarrassed this country. He loved the country, he sacrificed for the country, and as he proved both before he became president and long after being president, he never not put the country first, and he certainly reached his hand both down and out to people that needed it.
We've certainly gotten used to, or getting used to, presidents acting tougher, demonstratively tougher, trying to give that image of being tough. But I'm curious, I can recall one incident, one reason, where I remember President George H.W. Bush being angry and sounding angry. And even that he didn't wear particularly well. He was legitimately angry, but it didn't play that way on TV. He was not, he was more about the substance and less about the style. So he didn't play as well on TV as other presidents or politicians did. He wasn't as mindful of that. And I think there's something to be said for that. It's hard to envision a president who gets elected who doesn't have that balance the other way. I'll answer my own question, but the one time I can remember him being angry was after Iraq invaded Kuwait. And he was marching up support for and trying to drumbeat support for the coalition to go up against Saddam Hussein. And he would call him Saddam. And he would sort of angrily yell into the phone, the butcher, Saddam, will be driven back to Baghdad. But that's about as angry as he got.
And by the way, he got a coalition of some 29 nations, including Syria. Think about this in today's context, and Egypt. And they'd go to the Iraq border and not beyond it. But he didn't try again, despite the football, and then say, American, and who does this sound familiar? Not take the oil and whatever else. Right. This was about protecting the sovereignty of a country, and he got the world to go along with it, and that was the reference to the 93%.
Because he knew it was in the best interest of the country and of the world to do that. Probably was also aware that it wasn't necessarily in his own best political interest, but more often than not, when those two forces came into conflict with one another, what's the best for the country versus what's best for myself, he sided with what's best for the country, with a few exceptions.
So a friend to this program that I know you know well as well, Giancarlo Parasuti, he was, for all intents and purposes, the body guy for George H.W. Bush. And what that means is he's with him at all times, and he sees him as his most human, and then obviously he sees him before both, every elected body, the cameras, and everywhere in between. And he said, listen, there isn't a person in the last 50-something years, whether they worked in the household staff or they were heads of state, that wouldn't pick up the phone and still talk to the president, because the late president with the handwritten notes and everything else. But he said a funny story. He said, so it's 92, and the president lost a re-election that he never thought he'd lose, because he thought the president was really a global commander-in-chief. He couldn't think of a governor from Arkansas without a stitch of international experience. How could anyone vote for it? He really didn't have a feel, then did President Bush, on where the electorate was, particularly in domestic issues. Nonetheless, it was a crushing defeat, losing handily. So, and again, put this in today's context. He looked around the room and he saw that, these room at the White House, that there was a really somber group. So he ask Dana Carvey, who a lot of people think his parody of President Bush certainly didn't help out the president in the election campaign, right?
Didn't.
But he reached out and said, hey, will you do me a favor? Will you do me and crack the staff up because they're really down and they need to pick me up?
For the
and
benefit
he
of the
did.
staff.
And he did. And Carvey, by the way, another one of these people who stayed friends with him for the balance of his life, said he was such a gentleman and only was cared about was the staff. Imagine, in today's context, a president being concerned, or this one at least, about how his staff's feelings are after a bad day.
And
that's just a window in terms of the then and now.
I watched that clip this week in the lead up and after the president's passing, and President Bush was in the crowd. It wasn't even like an audience for him. He was just with his staffers and enjoying the fact that they were having a moment and that they were having a good time. He had no problem with Carvey's impression of him, even though it was cutting on him.
If I can introduce, there was an anecdote that isn't known that John Carl told me, which was he wanted to surprise the staff, so he had the voice of God, the public announcer of the White House, introduce him as the commander-in-chief. And his security staff was so against it, they said, absolutely not. The announcer can only announce the real president. You're not having it. The president's like, no, it's okay. They're like, we don't care, Mr. President. We're not having a joke interview. It's like, no. It's okay. I'm down with this. This is totally fine. And then came the announcement. He came out. So, I mean, even against people who thought they were protecting him, he got it. That you had to be able to laugh.
Absolutely. And even it's some of the lines that we associate closest with President Bush actually came from Dana Carvey. And he said in that appearance, the wouldn't be prudent, not going to do it, wouldn't be prudent. He said he heard Bush say that once. And he did it every week on Saturday Night Live, and it became as associated with Bush as anything Bush ever said.
All right, when we come back, we'll continue to remember the late president as his family and late president's body. They will be heading now to the St. Martin's Episcopal Church in Houston to lie in repose. Stay with us.